Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session. This session has been accompanying the meeting for almost 25 years, organized by Spirito Gentil series, and the format of this year is quite special. It is a challenge for us. And anyway, we have decided together with the meeting organizers to preserve this session that will have a one-of-a-kind form, but we believe that it will maintain the quality and the character of Spirito Gentil. I'd like to start with the title of the meeting because just like every year, we try to give a musical contribution to the focus that the meeting has on specific themes. And by reading this title, Devoid of Wonder, We Remain Deaf to the Sublime, I was thinking of another important anniversary, 1770, when Beethoven was born. And I just tried to imagine what Beethoven would have thought about this title, Devoid of Wonder, We Remain Deaf to the Sublime. Well, first of all, I think that the word that would have stricken him most is sublime. We all know about Beethoven's personal history, and that was a sort of curse for him. And then he would have noticed the other things, wonder and sublime. The curse was about the fact that he was deaf, we know. Well, we will have the execution of two sonatas for piano, and we will focus on the wonder and the urgence of the sublime. And with the aid of technology, I will try to share his way of feeling before what we call the sublime. For Beethoven, this was an imperative. He was deaf physiologically, but he was deaf from the perspective of the human experience. And our aiming at something makes everything infinite. And this aiming is the key word in every work, in every music by Beethoven, that everything is made infinite. How can this aiming make everything infinite in terms of music? Well, we will listen to the first sonata, whose title is The Tempest. So the title itself speaks by itself. And the second sonata also has a title, but the most interesting case was the Pastoral, his symphony that is very well known. And he also added some titles that, as in this case, the Tempest should be a description of a tempest. But in the 16th symphony, the Pastoral, he is also interested in clarifying, and he says it's not a musical painting. You don't have to listen to it as if it were the description of a hurricane, but it is the expression of a sentiment. It's not about a superficial emotion, a superficial feeling. And here we see the genius of Beethoven, to feel that there is a link between us and the world. There is a strong link between our balance and the balance that we can find everywhere. Feeling that my own life is linked to the life of the rest of the world. So when I see a storm, when I see a tempest, it is as if it were talking about my inner chords, not just the first drops. So we will try to listen to the first and the second sonatas this evening from this perspective. And what is the sentiment we're talking about? I'd like to give you a sort of interpretation of the sonata we will listen to, and I will use the text that Don Giussani, the founder, the creator of the Spirito Gentil series, explained why he liked this sonata. He says that the sentiment behind it is not the depiction of a weather event, but it is the word. By listening to these sounds, we should perceive and think about our moments of challenge. That is, those situations in which when we are before reality, when we are before the truth, we are struck because we have a sort of test. Today I will give the floor more to the musicians. I just give you some hints and bits and pieces of poems by Clemente Rebora, because I think these will be efficient and take us by hand to listen to the sonatas. The first one, the Tempest, includes 3 movements, and then I will introduce the musician, and the musician will give us some more guidelines. I would like to introduce 3 poems by Rebora, just to give you an idea that these can be linked to the 3 movements that you will listen to in the Tempest. And why is it so? Because this first poem, Time, of course, there's no time to explain every single word. It's an extraordinary text, but you will find a constant tension. It is a kind of stretch the line, and the droplets drop upon a shock, and it says, I open windows and doors, yet nothing goes out. Nobody comes in, inert inside. Outside the air is rain. Droplets dropping from a tense line all together upon a shock. So this poem gives us a sort of sense of emptiness, of something that hasn't reached its full maturity, its full conclusion. In the second movement, I have linked this second poem by Rebora, that is Hope. It really seems to open up a hope. I used to hope in myself. I used to hope in time. I used to hope in the good coming to the earth. And then this refrain that you will also find in the music, but everything passes, transpasses, and everything ends up overwhelmed in anguish. And the last poem is very descriptive, because the last movement can be seen, can be perceived as the description of a whirl, of a thunderstorm. The tempest arrives, enters the city, and this is the final terrific end. And the poem reads, from the intense mass of clouds, down with burnished armor, with flashes of shiny yellow, with bustling and hurtling sound. The storm plunges down and roams on the wind, stretched full out on its horse, fields and country houses, and gives battle. So there's a sort of destructive sense. Now I give the floor to Maestro Giurato. He teaches at the Conservatory of Parma. He plays in concerts as a solo and also in orchestras from Bach to Sostakovich. After perfectioning with the Bezov in 1998, he played 4 hands with him multiple times, and he published the book Reflections on the Art of Playing the Piano for Bonomi Publishing House. I leave you the floor, and you can start the introduction. Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Since I started studying this sonata for the first time, I found this title quite intriguing. We don't really know whether this was added by Beethoven or the manager just to sell more, and I wondered what that meant. It's a very special and mysterious sonata. And I found that Anton Schindler, that was a special friend of Beethoven, he helped him in different ways, and he wrote a biography of him. Basically, one day he asked the maestro what was the meaning of this sonata in Opera 32, what could the interpretation be? And Beethoven was happy on that day, and he said, well, you have to read Shakespeare's The Tempest. So from here, I checked it, whether it was just a romantic legend that was transmitted to us, and I did some research, and I found some correspondences in music, just to give you an idea. For example, the beginning. This accord is so suspended, it's so special. If you listen to operas of the 17th and early 18th, they all have this sort of accord. It introduces the so-called recitativo. I beg all the musicians online to pardon me, but the recitative is a sort of introduction for those airs in which there is a focus on a character, and then one move on to recitativo, that is the opera that is going on. So here we are at the theater, and here it is as if Beethoven is opening the show and says, here we are. And then there is a little bit of hesitation, there is the preparation of the Tempest, and then there is the main theme. These higher notes that you will hear are a sort of cry of terror. That's how I interpret it. There can be the first page of the Tempest. I think there is a good connection with that. And also the beginning of the second movement, that begins more or less in the same way. So the curtain rises on the second act, and a dialogue, a hypothetical dialogue starts. A high voice, sort of a young lady, Miranda, and asking her father why they are on that island, prosperous. And the father then answers, and so there is a sort of a dialogue that you will be able to follow, because I think it is a wonderful movement here. And then we get to a third movement that does not really work so well. The Tempest by Shakespeare is a comedy, so nobody dies, and the initial Tempest is triggered by Ariel, this spirit of the air that maybe appears in this recitativo, magical recitativo. Beethoven writes extended sound as if he wanted to create a special effect. So there are overlapping points, but then in the third one, something different occurs. There is a real tempest, a real tragedy. So when I've found the comment by Don Giussani on the Tempest, I understood that probably he got to the core of this music. For example, he says, it is as if this sonata anticipated the final tempest in which Christ will manifest himself totally to the world and to the human beings. Since it's the last opera written by Shakespeare, even in the comedy there can be references, final references, but it is all the more interesting in Giussani's interpretation the fact that in every test in life, in every challenge in life, there is this sort of anticipation of the final Tempest. As Paolo said before, the test is a fundamental moment. And so Don Giussani says, we shall embrace the test to awake us, so that in life the truth can reaffirm itself, so that the truth can be present, and that things can be reframed in their right dimension. So it is a different spirit from the other two. There's always a dramatic sense. The rhythm is a bit upsetting. And there is also dissonance. But the general atmosphere is something else. I would call it the movement of gratitude. It reminds me of the second scene of The Tempest by Shakespeare, where Miranda finds out about her history for the first time, listening to her father, and then the interpretation by Don Giussani, Father Giussani, where in the Adagio by Beethoven there is a sort of breathing underneath. There is a sort of fine line of light behind the lights that can guide us even when we get into the tempest, as will be in the third movement. That's what I wanted to comment in this introduction. I wish we could listen to the music and enjoy life with this profound sense of the things that concerns destiny and human beings. So music is not just fun, but it's also an opportunity to go into a deeper meaning of things. And also I think that Rebera's poems that Paolo connected to each movement of the two sonatas can help us listen to this music full of wonder, so that we don't remain deaf to the sublime, as the theme of the meeting reads. Really, this theme is fully relevant to this man that wanders before this marvelous music, that we can think of Beethoven in those moments where this wonderful music was manifesting itself in his mind, despite this handicap of him that is deafness. In his testament he wrote that he even considered committing suicide, but he also thought that he had so many things to give to the world that then he stopped. Only art stopped him from doing that. And I must thank this friend that I found over these years, Beethoven and also Mozart, but Beethoven especially, because he went beyond his condition, fighting like a titan. He wrote, I want to grasp destiny to the full, and that's the spirit of Beethoven, and he could give us his sublime art by drawing on the wonder that he had in his mind, the sounds that he had in his brain and in his internal ear, even without listening to what was going out. Thank you. Thank you, Giulio. We can now arrange all the technicalities, and we will see that during the execution we will see this pattern, these graphics that will guide us and see where we are, and these wonderful verses by Rebera.
Grazie, maestro.
Thank you, maestro. This was really intense, and this leads us to the second part. We're going to listen to a second sonata, slightly shorter than the first one. It was written about 10 years after the first one. What Don Giussani wrote on the Tempest is very useful, because actually the final of his observation can pave us the way into the second sonata. No tempest can upset the peace and the security of those who belong to the truth. So belonging to the truth, this belonging is the belonging of a child. It is nearly naive. It is that being that can be found, for example, in some even arrogant people. The people who would not understand his being so naive. And I would like to pave the way to the second part, to introduce you the second part, the second sonata, who has a title is Adieu, the farewells. It is a sonata which is linked to a historical episode, so the escape of the Duke of Austria when faced with the Napoleon troops entering Austria in 1809. We all know the relation, also the ideal relation, and the ideal in terms also freedom that Beethoven would recognize in Napoleon. That episode, during that episode, the Austrian court had to escape, had to flee, and the Archduke Rudolf also had to flee. So seeing him fleeing, Beethoven wrote a sonata which is not so much the photographic description of that moment, but rather the idea of an initial farewell. And each of them has a title, and the first one is The Departure. Of course, he was kind of stimulated by that episode and by the confusion that was evident at that moment in the empire. But what he wrote is much more than a depiction. It was basically going away from something good, from an asset that is going away, from the good that is going away. So, les adieux, the farewells. And here too, I used two poems by Rebora. The first one is very known to many of us. In this poem, Rebora thinks about our assets and says that when we are too attached to an asset, to something material, basically we are sort of grasping these assets. And it's basically in the second is the absence. That's a description of something that is missing. Exactly as in this beautiful poem by Rebora. So that's the absence of someone who's waiting for so long that his senses are deformed. So basically you are not waiting for anyone, so you have this absence. But the second and third movement are connected, one to the other. They are one after the other. So from the second you directly go to the third, as in this poem, which says basically, but he must come. And the third movement, as a matter of fact, is entitled The Return. And that's highlighting actually this meeting with the good. So he will come, he must come, and he will come as solace for my and his suffering. He will come, perhaps here comes already his whisper. So we often hear about Beethoven from America. Because of this, we invited a friend, my personal friend, and also a friend of the Rimini meeting. So we're now connected with Chris Butt, who studied at the Juilliard School in New York City, and he did concerts for the Carnegie Hall and in Cassenga Vandolfo for Pope Benedict. He published compositions and music for the cinema and the theater, and he currently resides in Brooklyn. Welcome, Chris. So we look forward to listening to your introduction to Les Adieux. So good evening everyone. As usual, as I normally do when I speak before the Rimini meeting, I will start and say that I would like to apologize for my poor Italian. I took some notes. In the opening of the sonata, you hear the uncertainty. You feel sad because your friend Rudolph is departing. So because of you feel sad because of the farewell. After the three notes, there are three syllables. Lebe wohl. These three notes. Das Lebe wohl. And these three notes will become basically the motif of the first movement. Try and find them while you listen, because it is really fascinating to see how a composer finds something extraordinary from very little. So, art in symphony, in the Fifth Symphony. So in this opening, harmonies are very unstable, as the situation, the escape situation was unstable. But then suddenly music changes, the carriages are marching, and everybody perceives the excitement and the thrill, because this is due to the fact that they are fleeing. Then at the end of the first movement, the sadness that characterized the beginning comes back again. So this was really a farewell. This was really a farewell. We were at the end of we were sad while leaving the city, but now actually it's up to us. In the second movement, sadness, the sadness of the absence is very much felt. This movement is not autonomous, but it directly leads to the celebration of the return of the third movement. So you have basically two movements which are attached, one after the other. Slightly before the closure of the third movement, there is a very intimate moment of reflection, even of gratitude, in which you return back to the motif, the Lebe wohl, of the first movement. So this was just to give you an idea of what we're going to listen to. But and now I would like to say the following. Just imagine that you are Beethoven, you are nearly 40, you are becoming deaf. And Beethoven actually has no chance of finding a woman who can love him. So he has to leave in that situation. And yet he has so much love to give. And so his affection, his love is to his nephew. He's got a lot of friends. He falls in love with lots of women. He is a close friend of Rudolf of the Habsburger family. Beethoven is one of the first composers whose music is very personal. So music talks about his life. And Beethoven is also very honest about his life. As if he were to say, I am about to talk about my personal life. So let us listen to this example from the second movement, 30 seconds, 4 different moods. So fear, joy, sweetness. So Beethoven is telling us 4 different things, 4 different feelings about himself. Maestro?
Suonare.
Thank you. A friend of mine is a psychiatrist, and he says that the best drug against depression is to listen to Beethoven's music. And why? Beethoven was looking for things that might help him overcome his limits. There is always a battle to fight, and you have to fight for that. So, in this respect, Beethoven fights against music structures and conventions. He fights against orthodoxy. He fights against his being deaf and his inability to have a satisfactory relationship with a woman. And this love for truth requires donating oneself and being vulnerable, sacrificing oneself. Men and women all have great desires and not minor desires. And that is why my friend, the psychiatrist, loved Beethoven, because actually Beethoven shows us the greatness of life. Not a small life, but a great life. And Beethoven is basically linked to the best part of life. Let us now listen and let us see if Beethoven manages to touch us, to move us, and therefore to guide us towards something bigger, much bigger than what we can even imagine. Thank you very much.
Grazie maestro.
Thank you, Maestro. It is even hard to applaud before these things. We've gone a little bit over time, but nonetheless, I want to thank the participants, in particular the two masters that introduced these two works. Chris Watt, I hope he's still connected with us, and Giulio Giurato. There he is. And we enter this human and artistic world that Father Giussani has helped us to emphasize. So I would like to thank also those who made this event, this session possible, to go into the beauty of humanity. So that's all for this evening, and I hope to see you all next year. Thank you.
Che abbiamo sparato, è stato un ritornello che me l'aveva ricordato.